Past and current interpretations of the meanings of Nebuchadnezzar's image of a statue from chapter 2 of the book of Daniel are all wrong. Interpretations beyond Daniel's partial interpretation, of course. Watch this video to find out the real meanings. Just be aware that this video contains information that will surprise and challenge you. Please stick around to hear about it. To review and give some background, in the book of Daniel, chapter 2, King Nebuchadnezzar had a dream of a statue that was divided up into segments made of gold, silver, bronze, iron, and clay. A rendition of that image is shown here. Nebuchadnezzar asked the prophet Daniel to tell him what this dream meant. Daniel stated that the head of gold represented Nebuchadnezzar himself and his empire. Then each metallic segment below the head symbolizes an empire that will follow his empire. Daniel did not give any information about the identities of those future empires to help us identify them. From Daniel's minimal interpretation, Jewish and Christian prophecy buffs have made their own additional interpretations of what these prophecies mean. Unfortunately, much of their interpretations are incorrect, which will mislead many as to what to look for in the fulfillment of Daniel's prophecy. First, we need to briefly review some verses from chapter 2 to give the biblical background of this prophecy. It needs to be emphasized that in Daniel chapter 2, verse 28, it is explained that Nebuchadnezzar's vision is about the latter days, that it ultimately reveals mysteries about what will happen in the latter days. The exact verse states in the King James Version of the Bible, quote, "However, there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar that what will take place in the latter days." End quote. Note that the latter days are often referred to as the end times or the last days or even as just that day, depending on the book and the Bible version you are reading. The book of Daniel in the King James Version, this quote is from the King James Version, calls them the latter days or the time of the end. This is the prophetic dream of Nebuchadnezzar from Daniel chapter 2, verses 32 through 41. Nebuchadnezzar saw in his dream, quote, "The head of the image was of fine gold, its breasts and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet part iron and part clay. While Nebuchadnezzar looked, a stone was hewn from a mountain, not by human hands. It struck the image on its feet of part iron and part clay and shattered them." End quote. Here is that image, again, as a statue of a man. Note the emphasis on the stone hewn from a mountain, not by human hands, in the text of the verse. That strikes the image at the base of it, where the feet are made of a combination clay and iron, its weakest point. This collision results in the destruction of the whole statue. Then Daniel explains the meaning of the dream to Nebuchadnezzar. Thus, quote, "You, O king, are the King of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom. You are the head of gold. After you there will arise another, second kingdom, inferior to you. Then another, third kingdom of bronze, which will rule over all the earth. Then there will be a fourth kingdom as strong as iron, inasmuch as iron crushes and shatters all things. So like iron that breaks in pieces, it will crush and break all these in pieces. In that you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, it will be a divided kingdom, but it will have in it the toughness of iron, inasmuch as you saw the iron mixed with common clay." End quote. This illustration shows a typical Christian interpretation of what the empires were that were prophesied in Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Of course, Nebuchadnezzar was the head of gold, as Daniel himself explained, but Daniel gives no information as to the identity of the other empires or eras to follow, that is, the other body parts below the golden head. Bible prophecy scholars and other people have theorized the identities of the remaining empires. Their theories usually portray the Media-Persian Empire as the chest and arms of silver. That's the empire that followed Nebuchadnezzar's Neo-Babylonian Empire with the invasion by Cyrus the Great of the Median Persian Empire. The bronze section is often explained as being the Greek Empire and the iron legs the Roman Empire. The sections there are circled in the illustration. In this version, the feet of iron and clay mixed together is just termed the end times. As to the proposed identities of the two feet, the various interpreters propose everything from a resurrected Roman Empire to the European Union as possible empires that will arise to fulfill the iron and clay feet prophecy. Others have even proposed that it is the United States that is that empire of the mixture of iron and clay. But nearly all of these theories about the circled sections there are incorrect. Just a reminder about that rock that destroys the statue. And remember that the destructive rock is created and propelled by non-human hands. So just who or what is it that destroys this image? Specifically, per the verses, the rock strikes the feet and the entire image is broken up and destroyed. The meaning of it is that the old order of worldly kingdoms is broken and ended, to be replaced by the setting up of God's kingdom on earth, as God has promised. This would take place in the latter days, as foretold in verses 28 and 45 of Daniel chapter 2. Thus, the appearance of the Messiah on earth ends the succession of worldly empires in that area of the world. Thus, it is God who propels that rock, and the rock is the Messiah's arrival among us. If those Christian interpretations are wrong, what then are the real meanings? We begin with the same illustration here. Each body part represents a kingdom or era that succeeds Nebuchadnezzar in that area of the world, meaning in and around the geographical area of the then Neo-Babylonian Empire. Note that this image is a timeline from the time of the Neo-Babylonian kingdom or era, the head of the statue, until the latter days. That's the feet made of iron and clay. This graphic will help us look at this statue as a timeline of historical empires and eras, starting with Nebuchadnezzar's empire, the gold, on the far left. It was succeeded by the silver empire or era, then the bronze, then the iron, and last, a kingdom or kingdoms that are a mixture of iron and clay. This last empire or empire's end, possibly quite abruptly given the symbolism of a huge rock striking the feet, causing the destruction of the whole statue, in the latter days. Does this mean that the world ends when the iron and clay era ends? No, it means that the latter days is at that stage of the coming of the Messiah, who will end these eras to begin an entirely new era or age, that of the kingdom of God on earth, brought to us by the Messiah and his teachings for all humanity. To emphasize that Nebuchadnezzar's statue is a timeline, I've laid the statue on its side to show you how each era, gold, then silver, followed by bronze, and then the iron mixed with clay, depict the succession of empires or eras in that same territory of Nebuchadnezzar's empire. So, what were these succeeding empires, if the Christian interpretations, as we saw in that one graphic representation, are wrong? It is essential that you understand the geography of Nebuchadnezzar's empire. His dream was about empires that would follow his own, meaning those that succeed in the same geographical area of his kingdom. This is a map of the Middle East with the territory of Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom or empire shown in the darker blue. Most historians count the duration of the Neo-Babylonian or Chaldean Empire as approximately 626 BCE to 539 BCE. Some also refer to it as the Second Babylonian Empire. It ended when Cyrus the Great of the Median-Persian Empire invaded and conquered Babylon in the year 539 BCE. King Nebuchadnezzar was a king in the Neo-Babylonian Empire. He reigned from about 605 BC to 562 BCE. Nebuchadnezzar's reign was a period of expansion of this Neo-Babylonian Empire. Just FYI, it is believed that the prophet Daniel was born sometime around 620 BC and lived until about 530 BCE. So he would have lived during the reign of Nebuchadnezzar and possibly until around when Cyrus the Great invaded Babylon. This is a different map to show where the territory of Nebuchadnezzar's Neo-Babylonian Empire was located in respect to other nations in the Middle East. This map gives some modern national boundaries in the light dotted lines. This should give you a good idea of the location of the territory we are discussing. The area inside this rectangle is where Nebuchadnezzar's dream and Daniel's interpretation of it foretells numerous other empires would succeed Nebuchadnezzar's empire in this same general territory where that rectangle is located. The empires that are foretold would affect this area of the world until, in the latter days, the last empire made of iron and clay would cease with the appearance of the foretold Savior, the Messiah to the Jews, who would also be the returned Christ Spirit to the Christians, as well as the anticipated Savior to Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, Zoroastrians, and even some indigenous tribes throughout the world. The new Messiah would come to spiritually rejuvenate the entire world and all peoples on it, not just this small part of it. Here is that statue again. Listed are those typical theories by mostly Christian interpreters of Daniel's prophecy of their ideas of the empires that followed Nebuchadnezzar's. The gold segment at the top of the statue represents Nebuchadnezzar's empire, as mentioned before. We know that the silver segment of the statue undoubtedly represents the Median-Persian Empire, since Cyrus the Great conquered the Neo-Babylonian Empire. It thus became a part of the Median-Persian Empire from about 539 through 331 BCE. This silver empire ended when Alexander the Great invaded and conquered Babylon and the surrounding areas. Alexander made Babylon his home and made the former Babylonian and Persian empires into his empire. With the death of Alexander the Great in the year 323 BCE, his empire broke up ultimately into 4 separate parts, each headed by one of Alexander the Great's generals. The Seleucid Empire segment swallowed up the former territory of Nebuchadnezzar's empire, but the Seleucid Empire was heavily influenced by Greek culture, since General Seleucus was Greek, of course, so it is still included in the Greek Empire category. Most of these past interpretations attribute the bronze segment to this Greek Empire alone, but this is where these interpretations begin to go wrong. The bronze section really is more appropriately termed the Hellenistic period or the Hellenistic Empire. The Greek influence continued in that area of the world throughout the Roman Empire governance. So the bronze segment truly should be called the Greco-Roman Empire or era. Note that even during the Roman occupation, the Greek language was considered the language of literature and spoken by many of the peoples in that area. That's why many of the New Testament books, or portions of them, were originally written in Greek, not Hebrew or Aramaic. So, what then of the iron segment that most Christian interpreters think should be the Roman Empire section? That, too, is incorrect. The true empire that is the iron segment is, or was, the Islamic Empire, that is the Sunni Islamic Empire. Then, of course, we have that last identified segment, the feet of a mixture of iron and clay, often thought of as symbolizing the end times. At this point, some history about the Prophet Muhammad, Islam, and the resultant Islamic empire or empires need to be briefly reviewed. Muhammad was a descendant of Abraham through Hagar. He was born around 570 Common Era. He received his first visions from the angel Gabriel around the year 610 Common Era, but he did not publicly proclaim his divine identity until around 613 Common Era. Arabia was predominantly pagan or polytheistic, and they were adamant idol worshippers. There were many tribes and clans in Arabia, and they all had their own idols that they worshipped. The city of Mecca was a center of pilgrimage for these idol-worshipping people. Those who had become wealthy from catering to the needs of all the people coming to Mecca on their pilgrimages were the most powerful and influential people and clans in all of Arabia. Muhammad's divine mission was to rid the region and the Arabic people of idolatry, a huge undertaking, which he was very successful in doing, but he made many enemies along the way, especially from the tribes and clans that earned their livelihoods from the practices of idol worshipping. These enemies attacked his followers, forcing the Muslims to form their own armies for the protection of the Muslim community. On several occasions, Muhammad stated that he wanted his cousin and supporter, Ali, to be his successor as head of Islam upon his death. Then after Ali, Ali's male descendants were to be the head of Islam. Unfortunately, it was not written down in a will. If you recall how Joshua was the right-hand man, so to speak, to Moses, that was Ali's spiritual and administrative relationship to Muhammad and Islam. A special note here, most of the military encounters in Muhammad's time were defensive in nature, not designed to spread Islam. It was basically only after the death of Muhammad that the new leadership of Islam adopted conquest as a means of gaining power and wealth, and spreading Islam in the result too. Muhammad passed away in the year 632 Common Era. A schism developed between his followers about who should be the new leader of Islam. Many abided by Muhammad's verbal instructions and expressed support for Ali as the leader of Islam. But several of the more powerful followers chose among themselves a man named Abu Bakr to be the successor, called a caliph. Ali was initially passed over. This graphic hopefully will illustrate the results of the two ideas of who was to succeed Muhammad as the leader of Islam. On the left, it shows the start of the leadership of people who did not follow Muhammad's directive that Ali and his male descendants become the leaders of his faith of Islam. They instead selected Abu Bakr to be the first caliph. This became the sect of Islam called Sunni or Sunnah. The Muslims who held to the expressed wishes of Muhammad to make Ali the leader of the faith and his male descendants after him became the Shia sect. Their leaders were called imams. The first three caliphs, that's the Sunni side, lasted only for the first 24 years after Muhammad's death. Then, after the third caliph died, the mostly tribal leaders in charge finally listened to the people who wanted Ali to be the fourth caliph. But his time was cut short. Ali was murdered in 661 Common Era after only 5 years as caliph. His murder was probably orchestrated by his successor, Muawiyah of the Umayyad clan. Muawiyah became the fifth caliph. After Muawiyah, for the next 150 years, the Umayyad clan held power, a corrupt and treacherous power. The Abbasid dynasty of caliphs followed the Umayyads. They were corrupt and treacherous too, until the Mongols of Asia invaded in the year 1256 Common Era and put an end to them as leaders of the empire. But the population still remained Muslim, both Sunni and Shia. In fact, many of the Mongol conquerors became Muslims, obviously by choice rather than being forced to, since they were in charge. After the Mongols, there were several other Islamic empires and rulers. So now we switch over to the other side on the right, to the Shia branch of Islam. Ali was the fourth caliph for a short time, but he was also considered to be the first imam, the leader of the Shias. Then the line of successors were Ali's male offspring thereafter, shown in the line of successorship on the right, the boxes with the pink background. He was succeeded by his sons, first Hassan and then Hussein. After Hussein, there were 8 additional imams of the lineage of Ali. The 12th imam, however, was a very special case. After the 11th imam was murdered, the 12th imam disappeared. Note that all 11 imams were murdered, apparently prompted by Sunni caliphs or their minions, and that's partly the cause of the rift between the Sunni and Shia branches of Islam. This disappearance of the 12th imam occurred in the year 874 Common Era. This was the end of the imams meeting Muhammad's requirement to be a descendant of Ali and Muhammad through Muhammad's daughter Fatima, who was Ali's wife. It is not known if the 12th imam was murdered or hidden, but if he was hidden, he was never seen in public. There are also theories that the 12th imam never existed, that the 11th imam had no sons. There is a prophecy in Shia Islam that this 12th imam would return in the future to redeem Islam. This redeemer is called the Mahdi or Midi, and also known as the Qaim. Mahdi means the guided one, and the Qaim means he who shall arise. Now this is all according to the Shia branch of Islam. This image is from the magazine cover of the New Statesman, published on June 16th of 2011. This image is of a tug of war between the Sunni on the left and the Shia on the right. By the way, the spelling of Shia here is S-H-I-A, and it's one of several different spellings of it in English. This image illustrates the contentious and sometimes violent relationship between these two branches of Islam through the centuries. But it should be noted that these two sects have cooperated too in many instances, especially when they had a common concern or enemy. The orange areas on this map show the expansion of the Islamic Empire by about the year 1000 Common Era. The light blue rectangle shows the territory of the former Neo-Babylonian or Chaldean Empire of Nebuchadnezzar. That territory is controlled by Muslim rulers in the year 1000 Common Era. Note the purple area, that is the remaining territory governed by the Byzantine Empire in the year 1000 Common Era. Ultimately, The Islamic Empire defeated the Byzantines and took over the purple areas of Turkey up into the lower Balkan peninsula of Europe, into Bulgaria, Macedonia, Greece, Albania, Serbia, etc. The borders of Islamic empires and kingdoms shifted and changed throughout the centuries until we see the extent of the remnants of the empire in the year 1850 Common Era, which is the Ottoman Empire, shaded in dark tan. Persia, now known as Iran, is shaded in a medium green on the right. Persia became Iran in 1935. The Sunni Empire no longer controls Persia by this time, around 1850. And of course the blue rectangle shows the former area of the ancient Chaldean Empire of King Nebuchadnezzar. At this time, 1850 Common Era, both Persia and the Ottoman Empire were rather weak and plagued with corruption. As mentioned, there have been lots of changes to the Middle East and the Islamic Empire since 1850, obviously. But the mid-1800s had some key events that you need to know about in relation to fulfillment of the prophecy of Nebuchadnezzar's statue. All will be explained. Please hang in there. We are getting to some important information coming up. Now we can go back to our statue and zero in on those feet. Those feet made up of a mixture of iron and clay that would have an important role in the latter days, the end times or last days. What is their important role? That stone cleft from the mountain by non-human hands hits those weak feet and the whole statue falls and is shattered to bits in the latter days. The reason that Jewish and Christian interpreters of the book of Daniel made the monumental error of not recognizing the existence of the Islamic Empire conquering the Persians around the year 634 Common Era and enveloping the former territory of Nebuchadnezzar's empire into theirs is due to their persistent denial of Muhammad having been a prophet of God. The reason why is they do not want to think Muhammad was the return of Christ, the Messiah. Unfortunately, they also judge Muhammad by the behavior of some of his followers. But I don't want to dwell on this. Suffice it to say that this denial of the Islamic Empire has muddied the waters when trying to figure out when and how this prophecy would be fulfilled. Big news here. Attention! This prophecy of Daniel has already been fulfilled. Continue watching to find out how. After that detour to give a very brief explanation of Muhammad and what happened to his faith after his death, we must go back and continue our discussion about the feet of the statue, made of a mixture of iron and clay. What do those feet signify in this prophecy of Daniel's? Of course, a divided kingdom, obviously divided into two sections, symbolized not only by the 2 feet, but also by the 2 materials that compose those feet, iron and clay. But what about another theory? Perhaps one foot was iron and the other foot was clay. However, in closely reading verses 41 and 42, that is not the case. The verses speak of even the toes being a mixture of iron and clay, and that iron was in both feet. That gives this empire the firmness or strength of iron throughout the feet, but the weakness of clay throughout the feet. This divided kingdom would exist for a period of time in the territory of the former empire of Nebuchadnezzar. Then it would end sometime during the end times or latter days. A little note about the term latter days. Not all versions of the Bible use that term. The King James Version and several others do. But some other Bibles refer to this time as in the days to come, or simply state the future, or some other terms. There are some other terms that I am equating with that term latter days in this video. Those other terms are the end times, that day. Now, the term that day in some places in the Old and New Testaments may be referring to some other period of time or place. It all depends upon the context of the verses. If the verses speak of, in prophetic terms, the time when the Messiah would appear, that is the type of that day reference I am referring to as an equivalent term to the latter days. Then there is the term end of the world. The King James Bible still uses this phrase, even though the Bible language specialists have determined that this is a translation error. Their incorrect translation misleads us about this future time. The end of the world phrase is nearly exclusive to the book of Matthew, which was written in Greek. The original Greek uses the term you see here at the top, aeon, as in end of the eon. The King James Version incorrectly translated this word as world, as in planet Earth. If the author of the verses really meant the physical world, they would most likely have used the term cosmos, just as many other verses do. So the passages in the book of Matthew that refer to an end of the world should rather state end of the age. Note that many newer editions of the Bible do indeed now state end of the age in the book of Matthew, where previously they stated end of the world. Also note that in other books in the New Testament, almost all references to the physical world do indeed use the Greek word cosmos, not eon. That's those that are written in Greek. So the latter days are the end of an age, symbolized by the destruction of the statue, as we will see shortly. To discover what this divided empire is, we need to know the approximate time of the arrival of the Messiah and the end of the age. It would be most helpful if we had a time period to look at so that we can examine events occurring in that area of the world that Nebuchadnezzar's empire used to occupy, to determine if any of them could reflect the characteristics of a divided kingdom in that time period. The Bible does not give the day or hour of the coming of the Messiah. However, the Bible does give us the year. That year is 1844 Common Era. Let me explain as briefly as I can. How do we know that the Messiah would return around the year 1844? Well, the book of Daniel tells us so, specifically in chapter 8, verses 13 and 14. Quote, "Then I heard one saint speaking, and another saint said unto that certain saint which spake, How long shall be the vision concerning the daily sacrifice, and the transgression of desolation, to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden under foot? And he said unto me, Unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed." End quote. That last sentence stating, "Then shall the sanctuary be cleansed," how would it be cleansed? By the return of the Messiah, of course, at the end of those 2,300 days. His divine presence on the earth, bringing a new revelation from God, would release us from the human mistakes that have been injected into our world since the coming of the first Messiah, Jesus Christ. What does 2,300 days mean? 2,300 days in Bible time prophecy speak is equal to 2,300 earth years. We know that this prophecy ends, that is, it's to be fulfilled in 2,300 years. But we have the question, when does the prophecy start? When do we start counting those years? Shown here is a timeline of the Jewish calendar. The numbers are obviously the years. On the left, the timeline begins at the year 3000 on the Jewish calendar. Note that the year this video was made, May of 2024, is shown on the far right with yellow lines and text. Daniel states that the 2,300 years start when the edict was issued to rebuild Jerusalem. That is from Daniel chapter 9, verse 25. The edict that actually resulted in the rebuilding of Jerusalem was issued in the Jewish year 3,304, which is the year 457 BC in the Western Gregorian calendar. That's shown here on the left, bottom left. Now, if we count 2,300 Earth years from the Jewish year 3304, we get to the year 5604. As you see here, we are counting from the first day of the month of Nisan in 3304 to the first day of Nisan in 5604. This date, Nisan the 1st, was the 21st day of the month of March in the year 1844, Common Era, according to the Gregorian calendar. Thus, the 2,300-day prophecy in Daniel chapter 8 was to be fulfilled on or about 1844 AD, or Common Era. Thus, we have arrived at that year 1844 from the book of Daniel itself. Note that there are other Bible prophecies that culminate in that year, 1844. I will put a link to a video that explains several of these time prophecies that point to the year 1844 in the description for this video. You can access this information below the title of this video. See the link word "More." Here is that actual verse from Daniel chapter 9, verse 25, that tells us the starting point of the 2,300-day prophecy. Quote, "Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the command or decree to restore and build Jerusalem until the Messiah the Prince, there shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks." Note that this verse is about the rebuilding of Jerusalem, not about the rebuilding of the temple. The temple was rebuilt in 515 BC. After its completion, then the Hebrews wanted to rebuild the city of Jerusalem, which was still in ruins. To clarify, what I am stating is that there are 2 time prophecies in the book of Daniel predicting the appearances of 2 separate messiahs. The first time prophecy foretold Jesus Christ. The second would be the Messiah of the latter days. Christians would know this second Messiah as the return of the Christ Spirit. Both these prophecies have the same starting point in time, and that is that 457 BCE, as we just determined. That is shown as the vertical yellow line on the left here. The prophecy in chapter 9, verses 24 to 27, foretells precisely when the Christ is manifest in our world. This prophecy is called the 70-week prophecy. You have to multiply 70 by 7 days in a week to arrive at the number of days until his appearance. That means, of course, 490 Earth years from the year 457 to 34 AD, or Common Era. The last week, that's the 69th week of those 70 weeks, was when the Christ arose halfway through the last week of those 70 weeks, as explained in these verses of Daniel. In chapter 8, verses 13 and 14, the 2,300-day prophecy predicts when the Messiah of the latter days would appear. It, too, starts at 457 BCE, and we already know that it ends at the year 1844, when the second Messiah appears in the latter days. Now, you may be wondering when this all was discovered, and by whom, and why haven't you heard of this date of 1844 before? You may be surprised to learn that there were hundreds of Christian Bible scholars and Bible prophecy buffs in the early to mid-1800s who were loudly proclaiming the imminent arrival of the return of the Christ in or around the 1840s. One of the most famous leaders of this movement was named William Miller, a farmer from Upper New York and Vermont. All these very energized and expectant people, principally in the USA, Canada, and the United Kingdom, had their high hopes dashed to the ground when the various dates they chose for the return failed to result in the Messiah coming down on a cloud from the sky to land at their feet. Christ did not meet their interpretations of Bible prophecies of his return. Yet few people went out into the world to look for him. They all expected the Christ to come to them personally. If you think of it, just how was the Christ to come down on a cloud in New York, Canada, Europe, etc., all at the same time? Logic and science were not really on their side to begin with. I have covered this whole history in a couple of my other videos. If you want more details, these videos will provide it. I will put the video titles and links to them in the video description accessible below this video on YouTube. If you would like to know more about this Millerite movement, as some call it, named after William Miller, you can go to wikipedia.org or into the search box on Wikipedia, type in that first phrase there, the red diamond, William Miller, parentheses, preacher, end parentheses, and or the Millerite movement. You can also do a search on the terms Second Great Awakening and the Great Disappointment. When all the great expectations for the return of Jesus Christ coming down from the sky on a literal cloud were destroyed by the non-event of all time, some have tried to recalculate this starting date to explain why he did not arrive when expected. But there have been others who stuck to this 457 BCE date, such as in this video. If you wish to research this, I recommend this article written by William H. Shea, who specialized in the study of the Book of Daniel from a Seventh-day Adventist point of view. The article is titled Supplementary Evidence in Support of the 457 BC as the starting date for the 3200 day/years of Daniel, chapter 8, verse 14. The article was published in spring of 2001 in the Journal of Adventist Theological Society, which is produced by the Seventh-day Adventist Church. The article can be accessed through the website shown at the bottom of the screen. A link to it is also in the description of this video, which is accessible below the title of the video. Look for it for the word more, M-O-R-E, as the link to the description. Here on this map, we are in the mid-1800s. The dark tan shaded area is the extent of the Ottoman Sultanate or Caliphate Empire as of 1850 Common Era. The dark green or teal area to the right shows Persia at that time. The blue rectangle is just to remind us of the territory of Nebuchadnezzar's empire, where we began this video, which existed nearly 2,400 years before the Ottoman Empire and Persian Kingdom in the 1800s, Common Era. You will see this map several times in the following slides. And ignore the red line at this point. I'll tell you about it a bit later. So back we go to the feet made of iron and clay. And remember our timeline, that the feet symbolize an empire that would be in existence in the latter days. The latter days begin around the year 1840 Common Era, according to the Book of Daniel, and a Jewish mystical book called the Zohar. Iron, as a material, is strong, unyielding, and brittle. Clay is malleable and, when dry, is breakable. In the early 1840s, the latter days began. We know that from Daniel chapter 8, as we discussed, that 1844 would be when the Messiah would appear and the sanctuary would be cleansed. Therefore, the iron symbolized the existing Sunni Islamic Empire at that time, the latter days, that is, the Ottoman Empire. The ruler of the Ottoman Empire was the Sultan, who was also the Caliph, head of the Sunni faith. Government and religion were merged. The clay represents the Shia Islamic nation of Persia. Also note that in some other Bible prophecies, references to earth, as in clay, represents the country of Persia, even in pre-Islamic times. And note that the ruler of Persia, the Shah, was not the leader of Shia Islam. Government and religion were separate, although the clergy of Shia Islam was extremely powerful, and of course still is. So the iron in the latter days, that is, Sunni Islam in the former territory of Nebuchadnezzar, was the Ottoman Empire. The symbol of the Ottoman Empire is the crescent moon, which is also the symbol for Sunni Islam. The symbol for Persia, now known as Iran, is shown here, the lion with the symbol of the sun showing brightly behind it. But in the time of Nebuchadnezzar and Daniel, a symbol for Persia was the sun. The sun symbol originated in ancient times, even before Persia was primarily of the Zoroastrian faith. So in Daniel's time and his writings, the sun symbolized Persia. This map by the Pew Research Center with the U.S. Department of State and Brandeis University shows the percentage of the population in the Middle East, that is, of the Shia sect of Islam, in the year 2017. The darker the green, the higher the percentage that is Shia. Iran, formerly Persia, is 90 to 95%. I'm taking this to mean that it's that of the Muslim population. I say that because there are other minority faiths in Iran, including the Baha'i faith, Christianity, Judaism, Zoroastrianism, and some other minority faiths, in addition to the Sunni population. Note that Iraq, in the heart of the former territory of the Chaldean Empire of Nebuchadnezzar, remember that rectangle, has a population that is 65 to 70% Shia. A portion of western Iran is as high as 95%. Syria is 15 to 20% Shia. Lebanon is 40 to 50% Shia. Truly, this rectangle area is a mixture of Shia and Sunni Muslims among those other minority faiths. These are the 2 feet of iron and clay. This is that map showing the Ottoman Empire and Persia in the mid to late 1800s, with the light blue rectangle signifying the approximate territory of Nebuchadnezzar's empire in ancient times, if you recall. We can kind of think of the feet of that statue straddling those 2 empires, 1 foot in each empire. Whereas the Ottoman Empire was predominantly Sunni and Persia predominantly Shia, there were Sunni Muslims in Persia and Shia Muslims in the Ottoman Empire. They were a mixture of that iron and clay per the description given by Daniel. That religious division and enmity between them weakened both empires. A few more factoids to understand the division between these 2 sects of the Islam. The Sunni Islamic Empire that preceded the Ottoman Empire had conquered Persia between 633 to 654 Common Era. This conquest of Persia put an end to the rule of the Zoroastrian Sassanid emperors at that time. The Sunni leadership was responsible for the deaths of the first 11 imams of the Shia branch of Islam. These first 11 imams were descendants of Muhammad through his daughter Fatima and his cousin Ali. According to Shias, Muhammad had stated several times before his death that his successor should be Ali, then his male descendants thereafter. The leadership of Sunni Islam did not follow this instruction. So after the year 874 Common Era, the Shia branch was no longer led by the descendants of Muhammad and Ali. Obviously, the Sunni branch never had that approved leadership, with a short-term exception when Ali was caliph for just about 5 years. His rule was tragically cut short when he was murdered. Thus, by the 1800s, neither the Sunni nor the Shia were led by people conforming to Muhammad's instruction that the male descendants of Muhammad through Ali become the leaders of his faith of Islam. And remember, the feet of our statue has something to do with the latter days. If you look at that red arrow pointing to the latter days there, the question of what that divided empire was to be is now answered. It's the Ottoman Empire and Persia, starting in the mid-1800s on into the 1900s as well. But what about that stone hewn from a mountain by non-human hands that destroys the whole statue? How do the Ottoman Empire and Qajar dynasty of Shahs of Persia enter into this? Neither of them exist any longer. We do know that. A little hint here. Could it be that the Messiah has already appeared in the world? That force from an invisible source that resulted in the downfall of both these earthly kingdoms. Some timelines of the Ottoman and Persian kingdoms will be reviewed next to illustrate the downfall of the feet of the statue. This timeline begins in the year 1800 Common Era on the left and goes to the year 2000 on the right. Note the beginning of the latter days in 1840 is on the timeline, in yellow. We'll begin with the Qajar dynasty of Shahs of Persia. That Qajar dynasty began in the year 1789 Common Era and ended 136 years later in 1925. At that time, an officer in the Persian army deposed the Qajar Shah's government and set up a new kingship called the Pahlavi Shahs. Then in 1979, the Pahlavis were deposed by a revolution, and the Islamic Republic of Iran was set up, wherein the Shia Muslim clergy took over the government. Previously, the Shah and his government were separate from the Shia Muslim clergy. Well, the Messiah did make his appearance right on schedule by the proclamation in May of 1844 by his forerunner. That's the Elijah figure, or you might think of him as a John the Baptist figure for this new Messiah. This forerunner was a manifestation of God in his own right, even had his own holy book, the Bayan. But he was also the forerunner of one greater than he, who he called him whom God shall make manifest, meaning the Messiah for a new era. This pronouncement by the forerunner took place in Persia, southwest Persia, in the ancient land of Elam, just as foretold in the Bible in Jeremiah chapter 49, verse 38, that God would set his throne in Elam in the latter days. This forerunner foretold the imminent appearance of the Messiah, the returned Christ Spirit, to come very soon. Then in 1863, this new Messiah did appear and proclaim his identity and station. Note that this Messiah is the Messiah to the Christians and Jews, the great announcement to Muslims, the fifth Buddha to the Buddhists, the expected 10th avatar, known as Kalki, to Hindus, among other expected divine saviors of other faiths. We will learn a little more about these persons shortly. Note that they appeared within the first 23 years of the latter days or end times, which began around 1840. The Forerunner's pronouncement was in the exact year foretold by Daniel, 1844 Common Era, and the Messiah's 19 years later. Next, the Ottoman Empire, the other foot, so to speak. The Ottoman Empire began in the year 1299 Common Era. The Ottoman Empire was often referred to as the sick man of Europe due to many factors, corruption being a major reason. In July of 1908, there was a rebellion against the Ottomans called the Young Turks Rebellion, wherein they attempted to institute a constitutional form of government. This rebellion, among other conditions, was a strong indicator of the worsening state of the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire ended in 1922 after 623 years of existence. The Sultan was also the Caliph, that is, the head of state for the empire was also the head of the Sunni branch of Islam. The Sultanate was ended in 1922, but the Caliphate did not immediately end. That position was eliminated 2 years later in March of 1924. Since that time, various attempts have been made to reestablish the Caliphate for the Sunni branch of Islam, but none have been successful. The end of the Ottoman Empire was, of course, partly precipitated by its being on the losing side during World War I. Another big factor in the downfall of both these empires is that both of them persecuted the Forerunner and the new Messiah. The Persian government killed the Forerunner, persecuted his followers in the most horrendous ways, and banished the new Messiah from Persia. Modern Iran, the former Persia, continues to harshly persecute his followers. The Ottomans persecuted the new Messiah and his followers and imprisoned or had him under house arrest for about 30 years. More about these persons next. I'll give you a brief overview of how this prophecy was fulfilled in 1844, just as promised in the book of Daniel. So what happened in 1844 Common Era that fulfilled this prophecy of the second coming of the Messiah? What was that boulder that God threw down to destroy that metallic figure? In May of 1844, a young man in Shiraz, Persia, a town in the ancient area called Elam, where the book of Jeremiah, chapter 49, verse 38, states where God would set his throne, this young man announced he was the prophesied 12th Imam, as well as the Qaim, that's the Redeemer of Islam, to Shia Islam, and he was the forerunner, the Elijah figure, to another manifestation of God who would soon appear, who was the new Messiah to the Jews, Christians, Muslims, and all others on the planet as well. Here is that verse from Jeremiah chapter 49, verse 38, quote, "And I will set my throne in Elam, saith the Lord." End quote. In the next verse, Jeremiah states that this would occur in the latter days. Note that Elam is in southwest Persia, or present-day Iran. Here are two maps of the Middle East. The one on the left is of the Middle East in ancient times, when Assyria, Babylonia, and Elam existed. The big red arrow is pointing to the location of Elam. Note that the black borders are modern ones, not at all the national borders in antiquity, so just ignore them on the map on the left. Now on the right is a map of modern-day Middle East, with the national boundaries. Note that the location of ancient Elam is noted in a small box with a yellow background with the green arrow pointing to it. Ancient Elam is now the southwest area of modern Iran, formerly known as Persia until 1935, when they changed the name of the country to Iran. And yes, Elam did indeed play a major part in the beginnings of the appearance of the Messiah of the latter days, very much in keeping with this prophecy of Elam being where God will set his throne in the latter days. Who was that young man who was the new Messiah's forerunner? His given name was Sayyid Ali Muhammad. He was born in Shiraz, Persia in 1819. The term Sayyid is a title which denotes that he was a descendant of Muhammad. His divine title is the Bab, which means the gate in English. The followers of the Bab were called Babis. What does divine title mean? If you think of Jesus, well, that was his given name, what his family gave him. The term Christ, which means the Anointed One, was one of his divine titles. Son of God was also a divine title for Jesus. This is the golden domed shrine of the Bab on the side of Mount Carmel in Haifa, Israel, where he is buried. The Bab was the Elijah figure to the new Messiah of the latter days. If you think of it, Carmel is the mountain of God where Elijah defeated the idolatrous priests with God's help. It is quite befitting that the latter-day Elijah figure is laid to rest on that mountain. The term Carmel means the vineyard of God. So, the year 1844 was the great announcement of the imminent appearance of the Messiah of the latter days, and appearance and proclamation of the Bab was the first step in the establishment of the Messiah's new revelation from God. The Bab was killed by order of the Shah and his prime minister in July of 1850. The Shia Muslim clergy were also pushing the Persian government to rid them of this popular figure and his faith in order to maintain their powerful positions. And now we come to the new Messiah for this new age. His given name was Hussein Ali. His divine title is Baha'u'llah, which in English means the glory of God. This building is his shrine, his final resting place outside of Akka or Akko, Israel, where he left this mortal world in May of 1892. This is a wider shot of the gardens surrounding Baha'u'llah's shrine. The photo was taken by the Times of Israel. The red arrow is pointing to the shrine of Baha'u'llah. You can see some visitors in the bottom center of the photo walking up the path to visit the shrine. They may be Baha'is from all around the world that came there for pilgrimage. I walked that path in July 2010 when I went on pilgrimage. Now I will review a few details about Baha'u'llah. He announced his identity and station in April 1863, outside of Baghdad, where he had been exiled by the Shah, the king of Persia. His followers were now called Baha'is, and his faith the Baha'i faith. He wrote hundreds of books and tablets which comprise the sacred texts of the Baha'i faith. I promised to explain about the red and yellow line drawn on our map of the Middle East. Remember that the dark tan areas on this map show the Ottoman Empire, and the green area on the right designates Persia around the mid to late 1800s. Baha'u'llah, the Messiah of the latter days, was born in 1817 in Tehran on the right side of the map, where the line begins. Initially, Baha'u'llah was a disciple of the Bab, his forerunner. After the Bab was killed in 1850 by the Persian army at the direction of the Shah and his minions, A wave of persecution of the followers of the Bab started, especially its key figures, including Baha'u'llah. Baha'u'llah was imprisoned for 4 months in the Black Pit prison in Tehran. After he was let out, he was exiled by the Shah to Baghdad. If you follow the red line from Tehran, you can see it shows Baghdad. Baha'u'llah was there for 10 years. But because the remaining followers of the Bab left in Persia continued to have contact with Baha'u'llah and others in Baghdad, the Persian authorities and Muslim clergy requested that the Ottoman authorities move Baha'u'llah and some others further away from Persia to cut their influence. The Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, Abdul Aziz, then ordered Baha'u'llah further exiled to Istanbul. Before Baha'u'llah and his family left Baghdad, enforced by the Ottoman army, he declared to the Babis in Baghdad that he was the one that the Bab had foretold as coming soon after him, who was what the Bab called him whom God shall make manifest. In other words, that he, Baha'u'llah, was the Messiah. After his declaration, the Babis who accepted Baha'u'llah as that figure were then called Baha'is, no longer called Babis. By sending Baha'u'llah to Istanbul, the seat of the Sultan, who was also the Caliph, the hope was that Baha'u'llah, who was of ancient noble Persian heritage, would find the pleasures of the Sultan's court would make him forget about his new religion. But the Sultan's hopes were dashed, so he exiled Baha'u'llah further to Iran. But Baha'u'llah's notoriety and fame spread, causing more concern to the Ottomans and the Sunni clergy. It was decided to send him and his followers to the prison city of Akka on the east coast of the Mediterranean Sea. You can follow the red line that then ends at Akka. Baha'u'llah arrived in Akka in 1868, where he was incarcerated in what is called the Citadel building for several years, then put under house arrest for most of the remainder of his life. Baha'u'llah wrote hundreds of tablets and books during his lifetime that are the sacred writings of the Baha'i faith. That red and yellow line thus traces the travels of Baha'u'llah as he was repeatedly exiled, initially by the Persian Shah, then several times by the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. During the time of Baha'u'llah's ministry, the ruler of Persia was the crown prince, then afterwards he became the Shah, Nasir-din Shah Qajar, shown on the right. The Sultan and Caliph of the Ottoman Empire was Abdul Aziz on the left. Baha'u'llah died in 1892 and is buried outside of the city of Akka in present-day Israel. Thus the Messiah will dwell in the Holy Land forever, just as promised in the Old Testament in Ezekiel chapter 43, verse 7. Note that most of Baha'u'llah's life was spent in the territory of the former Chaldean Empire of Nebuchadnezzar. There are Baha'is, followers of Baha'u'llah, in nearly every country and territory on the planet, approximately 8 to 10 million of us. There are approximately 170,000 in the USA. The building you see is the Baha'i House of Worship or Temple located just north of Chicago in Wilmette, Illinois. It is one of 8 continental temples in the world. A note here. The Baha'i faith is not a cult, no matter who claims that it is. I have been a Baha'i for over 50 years, that's 50 years, as in over half a century. The Baha'i faith does not have any of the characteristics of a cult. Our leadership is elected for limited terms at the local, regional, national, and international levels. There is no clergy at any level. The faith is not a syncretic faith, as some people assume. Syncretic means that they think we borrow our beliefs from other faiths. That is not the case. We have our own sacred and authoritative texts. We do not base our faith on the writings of other faiths, although we recognize and respect them, and sometimes even quote them. Please be aware that there is a lot of misinformation about the Baha'i Faith on the internet and elsewhere. Shortly, I will provide some websites where you can get some genuine, true information about the faith, should you wish to learn more. The administrative world center of the Baha'i Faith is shown here. It consists of these 4 buildings. It's very close to the Shrine of the Bab. It is also on Mount Carmel in Haifa, Israel. The seat of the Universal House of Justice is the building with numerous columns and a white dome. The Universal House of Justice is the supreme governing body of the Baha'i Faith. It has 9 members who are elected every 5 years by the elected National Spiritual Assemblies from all the nations. You may wonder, where are we in the process of the destruction of the statue? The stone, the Messiah, Baha'u'llah, has already arrived, which has upset the equilibrium of the old world order. This is the end of one age with the coming of the Messiah and the beginning of another age or era, the Golden Age, promised in the scriptures and teachings of the previous faiths that come from the arrival of their foretold Savior. The book of Revelation speaks of the new city of Jerusalem coming down from heaven to establish this golden age, also known as the 7th millennium or Sabbath millennium. That is the new revelation from God that the new Messiah, Baha'u'llah, brought. This out with the old and in with the new would not magically be accomplished in a day, at least not a human day. The old world order is still disintegrating, yet some threads of the new revelation from the Messiah are beginning to be woven into a new earth, a new age or era in the world, having a fresh injection of love, compassion, and God's law that is already having its effects on the spirits and mind of humanity. We can see that happening right now the world over. Cries for justice and peace are symptoms of this new revelation from God. The major laws brought by the new Messiah, Baha'u'llah, for our new age will be reviewed now, briefly, just so you will have a taste of what our planet's future may look like. Those major tenets include: there is only one God, and that God is the God of all the monotheistic faiths on the planet, and even some faiths that started as monotheistic but got changed over time by idol worship or other injections of human spiritual misunderstandings. There is only one race, the human race. All the colors, shapes, languages, nationalities, and levels of material prosperity of humanity are loved equally by God. There's only one faith of God, revealed over the millennia by multiple manifestations of God, which include Adam, Noah, Abraham, Krishna, Zoroaster, Moses, Buddha, Jesus, Muhammad, the Bab, and Baha'u'llah, as the latest but not the last. Each faith is brought by a manifestation of God who brings a divine message appropriate for that place, time, and people. The Bab and Baha'u'llah bring a revelation that is sent for this time and the next 1,000 years for the entire world and all its peoples. This process of God, wherein he periodically sends new manifestations of himself to us to spiritually enlighten us, is called progressive revelation. Men and women are equal in the eyes of God and must be given equal opportunities on his earth to education, occupations, and social and political organization and administration. Science and religion are in harmony. Science without religion can result in a focus on the material world alone, thus developing a purely materialistic view of life at cost to our spiritual lives. But religion without science becomes mere superstition, which also does not benefit us spiritually and leads us astray. The nations need to select one language and script to serve humanity as an auxiliary language. This language would not replace other languages in existence now. This new language, auxiliary language, would facilitate communication between peoples on a personal level. Electronic translation technology is nice and getting better, but it does not provide the intimacy and fluidity of expression to interpersonal relationships that is needed in the coming new age. The independent search for truth is a requirement for each individual. This requirement of the individual is partly the reason why there is no clergy in the Baha'i faith, along with humanity having achieved maturity after a long childhood and adolescence. Universal education is needed. This is for the continuing raising up of spiritual and material humankind and ensuring an ever-advancing civilization. Baha'u'llah brought a plan for world peace. World peace will not happen by magical means. We humans must do the work. Some of the main points of it include the following. Convene all nations and territories into a world parliament that would pass international laws to assure world peace. The UN could function as this world parliament if some changes are made to its charter. Baha'u'llah says that each nation would elect its representatives to this body. A tribunal must be set up that would settle all disputes, even if nations do not submit their case to this tribunal, or they do not accept its jurisdiction. We already have some world judicial entities, but they lack enforcement ability. This body, the Parliament, would set all national boundaries and enforce tribunal findings. This organization would assure collective security by having all nations respond and assist in resolving disputes. For instance, if a country invades another nation, such as by military force, or even by economic, political, or technological means such as cyber attacks, in order to disrupt that country, all the other nations together must force that nation to cease and desist, including by military force if necessary. I feel compelled to include at least one brief quote from the pen of the new Messiah. Quote, "This is the day whereon the ocean of God's mercy hath been manifested unto men, the day in which the day star of his loving kindness hath shed its radiance upon them, the day in which the clouds of his bountiful favor have overshadowed the whole of mankind. Now is the time to cheer and refresh the downcast through the invigorating breeze of love and fellowship and the living waters of friendliness and charity." End quote. Through this video, you have been notified of the appearance of the Messiah of the latter days. Remember, Christ said he would return as a thief in the night, sneaking in without being detected. He told you to watch for him. Christ said you would know the false prophets from the true prophet. He told you by their fruits you would know them. He did not say you would not know them. But that means that you have to investigate all claims. Christ said you would have to examine the evidence of the fruits of anyone who claims to be a prophet or manifestation of God. That means you should not believe them without examining their fruits, nor should you dismiss them as being false before you examine their fruits. Now I will review about 7 slides giving some resources to learn more about the Bab, Baha'u'llah, and the Baha'i Faith, if you choose to. Most of the slides are fairly brief. Now, another one of the major tenets of the faith is that we do not force our religion on other people. We do teach people, but only those who want to be taught. First, some websites. At the top here is bahai.org. That is the official international website to provide information about the Baha'i faith to those seeking it. Next is bahai.us. That is the official website for the Baha'i community of the United States. Then there is BahaiTeachings.org. That is not an official site. It's not run administratively by the faith. It provides many articles written about topics that many people are concerned about in our world from a Baha'i point of view. At the bottom is a direct address to the official online library of the sacred and authoritative texts of the faith, plus some additional writings and information. If you'd like to find a book that gives a good, interesting overview of the Baha'i faith, its main figures, history, beliefs, and its followers, without being preachy or trying to convert you, this is the book for you. But the name of it is Baha'u'llah and the New Era, and it's by J.E. Esselmont. I highly recommend that you read this book before reading many of the other sacred and authoritative texts of the Baha'i faith, to give you a good context for understanding Baha'u'llah, the Bab, and the history of the beginning of the Baha'i faith before you venture into the actual sacred and authoritative texts. It is available through Amazon.com and other online book vendors too. It may even be in your local library for free. And note, the full text is available online for free at this website at the bottom. Sorry it's so long. I have put this link into the video description of this video. See below the video window for the description. You may have to click on a link named More. That's M-O-R-E. This book, Some Answered Questions, is a great resource, especially those of you who are Christian, but it's not limited to Christians by any means. An online free version is available through the online library at that bahai.org/library website. Select the Writings by Abdul Baha to find it. The book can be bought through the BahaiBookstore.com, and you don't have to be a Baha'i to purchase it through Baha'i Bookstore either. An ebook and an audiobook version are also available through the Baha'i Bookstore website. Also note that Some Answered Questions also provides terrific commentaries on chapters 11 and 12 of the Book of Revelation and on the Book of Isaiah, chapter 11. Here's a list of my other videos that explain how the Book of Revelation has been fulfilled by the main figures of the Baha'i faith. That's the Bab, Baha'u'llah, and a few others. And of course, there are over 8 million believers in the world today. Pause the video if you need to. Now, at the top left is the video titled The Structure and Chronology of the Book of Revelation. I strongly recommend you start with this video before you watch any of the others about the Book of Revelation. It has some surprising gems of understanding in it that are very valuable when reading Revelation or watching my other videos on topics related to the Book of Revelation. And here's a list of many of my other videos on Bible prophecy fulfillment by the Baha'i faith's founding figures. You can read the titles. There's a variety of topics. Instructions on how to access them, all for free on YouTube, will be shown to you soon. This illustrates the 8 videos in my series on some of the chapters of the Book of Daniel. In the description of this video, see below for a link to it, I have included links to the first video, which is part 1 on chapter 2 of Daniel, and part 4, which explains chapters 8 and 9. Part 1 on chapter 2 is a full explanation of Nebuchadnezzar's statue. Part 4 on chapters 8 and 9 explain the time prophecies of the first and second coming of the Messiah, meaning when Jesus Christ and Baha'u'llah would appear. Here is how to find my videos on Bible prophecy fulfillment. Go to YouTube by entering that youtube.com into your browser. In the youtube.com site, enter the channel name shown below into the YouTube search box, and that channel name is Integral Destiny 9, all one word, no spaces, with a numeral 9 at the end. Then click on the tab labeled Video once you get to my channel. Another method is to enter the URL address you see here into your internet browser search box. That URL is youtube.com/c/ then my channel name, Integral Destiny 9. The list of videos will appear, and just choose the ones you wish to see. Please note that this video is an amateur production, if you hadn't guessed that already, by this singular person, me. It is not an official production by the Baha'i faith community. Copyright protections are claimed. Please do not make changes, additions, or deletions to this presentation. Have any questions? Contact me at that email address you see there. And thank you for watching.